So welcome everyone. Just to remind you all that TDAG is a network and a forum that brings people and organisations together to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration in the planning, design, construction, management and maintenance of our urban places. And evidence-based information is really important to us, and so is knowledge exchange and cross-sector working. So for you, the audience, we really do encourage your questions and participation in this discussion. So today's seminar is on the really critical, in my view, theme of getting it right for trees in terms of monitoring and evaluation to support establishment and growth. Planting is just a first step. It's a useless step if the trees don't become established. So I'd like to thank our knowledge sharing partners, the Arboriculture Association, Fund for Trees, Institute of Chartered Foresters, Institute of Highway Engineers, Landscape Institute, and the Urban Design Group. So to welcome our chair for today, Kate Sheldon, Chief Executive at Trees for Cities. And Kate joined Trees for Cities in 2004 as the Capital Woodlands Project Officer. She was formerly a trustee of the Bankside Open Spaces Trust, and I think very interestingly has an MSc in Social and Therapeutic Horticulture from Reading University, amongst, I'm sure, many other qualities and qualifications. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Gosh, that all feels like a very long time ago now. So a note to self to update my biography. So hello everyone, it's a real privilege to chair today's very important session on monitoring and evaluation to support tree establishment and growth. A very warm welcome to you all. It's great to see lots of familiar names and also to meet some new people in this group. So just a quick intro for those of you who don't know me or Trees for Cities. We are a national charity that empowers people to plant and care for trees in their neighbourhoods. And we focus particularly on places with low tree equity, recognising that most urban trees grow in more affluent areas and that very often our underserved communities have the lowest levels of tree cover, which is really where they're most needed. So we started in 1993. So after 30 odd years of operating, we've recently celebrated our planting our 2 millionth tree. But as Sue says, this milestone inevitably raises questions around just how many of those trees have established and continue to thrive. We put a huge amount of resource towards maintaining the trees that we plant and monitoring our establishment success. We're really proud of our track record in consistently achieving well over 90% establishment rate for our standard trees. But we fully recognise the considerable challenges and resources that this entails, including securing funds for tree maintenance. It still seems that funders are consistently more attracted by the planting outputs rather than the establishment outcomes. One very specific and logistical challenge really that we're addressing is obtaining establishment data from our planting partners, particularly from local authorities who are sometimes reluctant to share poor establishment outcomes. We've incentivized them to share data honestly, and this has helped us to identify when partners have needed more advice and support to encourage good planting and maintenance practice. And finally, as well as doing the monitoring and evaluation to measure the success of tree establishment, it's also vital that we as a sector communicate the importance of tree establishment and the impact of trees effectively. We're currently filming a podcast to help shine a spotlight on the challenge of establishing trees, particularly in a rapidly changing climate, and to share the realities of what this entails. So I'd be happy to share that podcast with you when it comes out. So this webinar is a really important part of that communication. So I'm really interested to hear how others are tackling these and other challenges. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Deanne Brettle, who is a PhD student at the University of Birmingham, who's going to talk about the performance gap. What does the global literature say? Dee, please introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
Hi, Dee, you're muted.
Sorry. Bear with me a second. This went okay earlier. Just share my proper screen. Okay, hopefully that's coming through now.
It's still looking a bit big and odd.
Right. Bear with me a second. Is that any better?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good to
Okay.
go.
Sorry about that. So yes, I'm Deanne. I'm a PhD student at the University of Birmingham, where I'm working on a research project called Carmine. And I'm also a volunteer for TDAG. I send out lots of the emails. So if you get emails from DXB354, that'll actually be me. And I also volunteer for a charity, an NGO called the Birmingham Tree People, and I'm currently the chair of their trustee board. Bear with me a second. Okay. So I joined Birmingham Tree People back in 2020 when I got involved with their project, which was monitoring the health of newly planted street trees. And so far, the project has trained over 50 citizen scientists to take measurements of newly planted street trees. They take measurements of the trees and the growing environment, and they also note down careful observations. And the citizen scientists have monitored roughly about half of the 8,000 trees that were planted by the City Council between 2015 and 2020. So I'm now on a quest to see if our findings are in inverted commas normal and how we could analyse the data. So we do still have some data to input and analyse, but our headline results are that within the city centre, we see about a 73% establishment rate for our newly planted trees. And then across the Birmingham area, more widely, we see an establishment rate of about 90%. So my first step was to look in the national literature. And to be honest, I couldn't really find much out there in its written form. I found some studies from the 80s by Gilbertson and Bradshaw. There was the Wonderful Trees in the Town report, which surveyed tree officers, asking them to estimate tree survival rates. Then the Forest Research Team have done some analysis of tree inventory information and finding survival rates of between 50 to 80%. But they commented on how tricky it was to actually combine the data sets, as the data wasn't always collected in standardized ways. And then more recently, studies by Daisy Brasington of just less than 800 trees across 4 cities, and the survival rates noted there were around 79%. And then finally, I found this Lost Nature report, which has monitored some new development sites, and they found around 39% of the promised trees were either missing or dead. So I then looked to the global literature, and I quickly found the study by Hilbert et al. From 2019, which looked at studies dating back to the 1970s. And in all of this time, they only found 57 studies on young urban tree mortality. I also found this study, which has been looking at the websites of cities to see if they're reporting information online there. But again, they found lots of reporting of promised trees, but very little about how many trees are surviving and thriving. So my literature review for my PhD has focused principally on trees that were a standard size upon planting, or the next size down feathered trees. And I've been looking at studies between 2003 and 2025. I don't want to give too many details away because I'm still hoping to publish the write-up, but long story short, I've been taking a deep dive into 30 studies of urban tree monitoring, aiming to collect details of the challenges facing trees and exploring the tree monitoring study designs and the results, and really trying to get a greater understanding of the barriers to monitoring trees. So I found that most studies have come from the USA, although there has been an increase of late in studies coming through from Canada and Europe. There was a nice mix of study designs with some focus just on street trees, others looking at a mix of streets, trees, parks and open spaces, or tree giveaway schemes where citizens are given trees to plant in their gardens. And some studies had monitored complete census of trees, others a smaller cohort, and most had involved a mix of people to do the data collection, including citizen scientists and students. About half of the studies collected just binary information, so whether the trees were alive or dead, but the other half used this categorical data, and oftentimes the data was recorded as the trees were in good, fair, poor, or dead. Almost all studies incorporated information about the species of trees that were planted, but very rarely were below ground variables such as soil properties included and considered in their study designs. Also, it's quite rare to include climate data in the analysis of their results, but more recently there have been more studies that have included socio-economic data in the analysis of their results. In terms of survival reporting, you can see that on the whole, survival rates are greater than 70%, with 40% of studies reporting survival rates of 90% or above. These studies with the high survival rates have really principally been undertaken to monitor something specifically. So, for example, they've been undertaken to understand the impact of community engagement or community stewardship, such as watering trees. I found that there are various ways of reporting data, which is important to understand. So there's cumulative survival mortality, which is this simple kind of percentage, how many were alive, how many were planted. And then there is the preferred method, which is the ecological annual survival mortality. And in this example, you see here, we have 61 trees surviving after 10 years, those ones in green. And when you use this formula at the top there, the annual ecological survival rate works out to be 95.2% or 4.8% mortality. And this 4.8% mortality is always taken away from the run-in total. So in this example you see here, in year one, we lose about 5 trees, 5 more the next year, but then we're down to 90 trees. So 4.8% of 90 trees would mean we lose less than 5 trees, and so forth. So the number of trees keeps coming down. And finally, I don't want to bore you too much with the math, but in the Hilbert et al. Study, they break down tree mortality rate into the establishment phase and the post-establishment phase. And across the studies, they found average tree mortality of 6.6% in the establishment phase, and this decreased to 3% in the post-establishment phase. But we end up with the same thing where we have, at the end of 10 years, 61 trees that are alive. So there are different ways to present data, but I think what is important is that we have to consider if we apply a young tree mortality rate of, say, 6.6 to the whole urban forest, we're likely to overestimate tree loss. But if we apply the lower tree mortality rate to young trees, then we underestimate tree mortality losses. But the key thing really is that, you know, even a 10% loss is a loss, right? And if you take into account the £650 needed to buy and then plant and look after trees for the first few years, then these losses build up to huge financial losses, especially if the trees are then to be replaced. But more than that, it's the missed opportunities, right? It's the missed opportunities of the ecosystem services and the health and well-being benefits that we were hoping for. So I guess the key question is, why are there tree losses? And more importantly, why have tree losses been persisting for so long? And will our changing climate bring even more challenges? And I don't pretend to have the answers, but in 2 years' time, when I hopefully become Dr. D, I will have more insights. But for now, I have this slide which shows a summary of some of the challenges facing urban trees. But ultimately, there isn't just one key thing. There's a series of knocks, and these knocks are spread across the pre-planting, planting, and post-planting phase. And as time goes on, it seems the accountability of who is responsible for the trees becomes more and more diluted. So what are some of the barriers to monitoring tree establishment? Well, let's be honest, we can find ourselves then looking at what I've called an uncomfortable truth. Maybe head in the sand is much better, or maybe there is just this general low expectation, this acceptance that we've been losing 23% of our trees in the first few years after planting for decades, and that this is just the way. Now, I generally hope that this isn't the case, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. There is also this barrier that we don't always have baseline data available. It can be hard to find accurate tree planting records from even, say, 5 or 10 years ago to now plan retrospective monitoring studies. And this is something that Daisy found in her study last year. Another barrier is that when you've got the data, it's difficult to then draw conclusions because studies, as we've seen, there's lots of challenges facing urban trees. And as I mentioned, studies often focus on what's above ground and they don't pay, and this is because that's practically what they can do, which is possible within the study. So there will always be somebody, even if you do monitoring in this way, somebody was saying, well, this is okay, but quite rightly, they'll say, what about the soil conditions? And then, of course, the big barrier is time to complete the monitoring, and also time because we're talking about long-term monitoring, which requires a long-term vision and partnership working. Why is it important? Well, monitoring and evaluation, like all things in life, is and business improves practice, and it can help target where human resources are most needed. And also understanding tree establishment supports urban forest modelling, and it's important to understand the economic impacts of this so-called green wasting. And in the case of monitoring trees with citizen scientists, well, tree monitoring offers a great engagement opportunity that can be done through the spring, summer and autumn months. And there's this lovely ripple effect where you have more people interested in trees, talking to other people about trees when they're out and about, and then they're having these lovely rich conversations with citizens actually where the trees are. I think the future will likely be a lovely hybrid mix of smart technologies alongside field monitoring. And I'm also excited to see if we can use the maintenance logs from contractors to understand tree survival better. And I know Simon will talk a little bit about monitoring over the long term because using canopy cover is important. But it's going to take some time for our newly planted trees to become discernible in satellite imagery, which is used for canopy cover metrics. And we don't have the luxury of waiting decades to evaluate the success of tree planting. So I'm convinced that we need both. We need monitoring over the long term for canopy cover, but then we also need to be up and personal and looking at trees in the early years so we can spot problems and have these continuous feedback loops. In terms of analysing the data, well, there's lots of things you can do, but I'll say when I was reading through the literature, I didn't have one of those aha moments that made me think, yes, this is what we need to do. But I think when you do have the data, you can do lots of things with this. And for example, you can have a look at climate, you can have a look at tree equity, you can have a look at planting space, and then you can also look at tree species information as well. And this wouldn't say, for example, with the dawn redwood, they have a good survival rate, or well, a survival rate of about 90%, but the graph shows that actually growth has been limited, and so these trees are not thriving. So I'm not saying not to plant dawn redwoods, I'm just saying if you do plant dawn redwoods, then you need to think about the maintenance that they would need. And I think that having information like this also helps feedback to the nurseries as well about what species are thriving. So I'm sorry, I think I've gone over, but I would just like to close by saying I hope that you can see the importance of monitoring and evaluating tree planting projects, especially in relation to these standard size trees, which require such a lot of investment up front to grow in the nursery. I would love one day for us all to share data like this and for this data to be recorded in a standardized way so that it would make sharing easier and we could have this continuous feedback loop to make more evidence-based decisions. I believe that sharing information will also hold people, planting actors to account, and maybe just the knowledge that trees are being monitored will increase survival rates. This is effect called the Hawthorne effect, but Hawthorne is spelled with an E, wherein behavior changes simply because organizations responsible for something know that they're being monitored and observed. So thank you very much for your attention, and special thanks to Simon, Tonya, Max, Steve, and particularly Nina, who's the street tree surveyor with Birmingham Tree People. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dee. You're getting lots of love hearts and clapping hands. So, so that's some good feedback for you early on. That was really, really interesting talk. Thank you. There will be a chance to ask questions yourselves at the end, but Sue is monitoring the chat. So, Sue, is there anything urgent that's been posted?
There were just a couple of
that Dee could answer now.
There were a couple of quick things. One was from Paula about whether planners could require young tree monitoring as a planning condition. That may be one actually for Simon later, unless you've got an answer.
I think all data is good data. And I think the more people that are involved with data collection and monitoring, the better. Wouldn't it be lovely if the people that are specifying trees were actually involved in some of the monitoring, I would say.
Yeah. And Kate, your own question, that DEFRA is currently in consultation on the ETAP. So did you find any evaluation of existing government schemes? Because they put a lot of money in.
That's not something that I've looked at personally, no.
I think that was about it for specific questions, Kate.
Thanks, Sue. Okay, we can come back to those. And yes, Chair's prerogative to ask a question, but I don't expect you to be asking mine or putting mine to the top of the pile. It would be rude to do that. Okay, thank you, Deanne. That was really, really interesting. So I'd like to introduce Rob Murison next, who is the founder of Thrive Tree Consultancy, who's going to talk to you about good practice for successful establishments. Rob, over to you.
Thank you. Let me see if I can share. Can we see that?
Yes, that's working well, thanks.
Excellent. That's good stuff. Yes, hello. My name's Rob. Rob Murison. I'm director of Thrive Tree Consultancy. I'm based just outside of Cambridge. This photo pretty much sums me up. So it's Cambridge, trees and bicycles. Young tree establishment has been a constant thread throughout my career. It started right at the beginning as an intern with Islington Council 15 years ago, where I was sent out on a bicycle to locate, map and assess the previous 3 years' worth of new plantings. Since then, I've worked in local authority, planting and establishment contracting and consultancy. Although these roles have all been very different, they've all given me the opportunity to see the same challenge from different perspectives. And over the years, I found myself coming back to one simple question: what does successful establishment actually look like? So let's start with the end in mind. I don't think anyone here needs convincing that trees are valuable. The recent heat waves have reminded us just how important healthy, resilient and equitable tree canopy is. While we've been talking about air conditioning and cooling our buildings, one of the most effective climate adaptation tools has been quietly growing in our streets and parks all along. Tree canopy is critical urban infrastructure. But I think it's easy to get distracted by the details. Planting targets, maintenance schedules, 3 year survival rates, they're all important, but they're not the end goal. The end goal is to create healthy, the end goal is to create healthy, resilient tree canopy that delivers the maximum environmental, social, and economic benefits that we all value. Whatever our role in the process, that's what we're ultimately trying to achieve. And that's important because it fundamentally changes how we measure success. So if we all agree that's the destination, why do we still struggle to get there consistently? I don't think it's because we lack knowledge. In fact, I'd argue we've never had better guidance. We've got BS 8545, which sets out the journey from nursery to the landscape. Excellent publications from TDAG, these seminars, the Arb Association's Wednesday webinars, guidance from the LTOA, and more recently, as previously discussed recently Daisy Brasington's excellent Fund for Trees research. It's provided some of the strongest evidence yet that successful establishment remains a significant challenge, particularly within new landscapes and development sites. So this isn't a criticism of guidance, quite the opposite. We already know what good practice looks like, yet we still aren't consistently establishing resilient trees. That makes me wonder whether the challenge isn't a knowledge problem, perhaps it's a delivery problem. My experience has led me to believe that trees rarely fail because of one catastrophic mistake. They fail because of one weak link in a series of often disconnected activities that are all essential for success. Nobody deliberately sets out to fail. The landscape designer specifies an excellent scheme. Nursery supplies healthy, high-quality trees. The contractor plants them with skill and care, and the maintenance team carries out the specified aftercare. Individually, each stage may be delivered well, but too often they're treated as separate activities rather than one continuous establishment journey. So I started asking myself, what's the one thing that experiences every stage of this project? Projects evolve, people change, contracts come and go, budgets, weather, climate, priorities, they all vary. But one thing remains from the very first sketch to the day that the tree becomes mature. The tree. The tree is the only constant. So perhaps we should organise establishment around the one thing that experiences the whole journey. We use the term establishment all the time, but what does it actually mean? We can all recognise when a tree has been planted, but when is it established? 3 years? 5 years? When the maintenance contract ends? Or simply because it's still alive after the first year? There doesn't appear to be a simple, widely understood, outcome-based definition. And if we can't clearly define successful establishment, how can we ever hope to measure it? So if the tree is the only constant, then perhaps it should have a clearly defined life cycle. Not just planting day, but a journey. One that starts before the tree even arrives on site and finishes only when the tree is capable of continuing its development independent and fulfilling the landscape function for which it was originally planted. And actually, I don't think this way of thinking is particularly unusual. We instinctively understand it with raising children. When a baby's born, we don't celebrate the birth and then just walk away. The early years of parenthood are intensive because they're critical. We provide food, water, shelter, care and protection because firstly, they're unable to do it themselves, and we try our best because we know those early years lay the foundations for the rest of the child's life. As children develop, our role as parents change. We gradually become less focused on meeting their immediate needs and more focused on helping them become more independent. With love, care and guidance, they're eventually able to support themselves, use the skills that they learned to continue to grow and live their lives to their fullest potential. And for me, successful tree establishment follows exactly the same principle. So this is the tree establishment life cycle I've started to think about. Concept and planning. This is where the foundations for successful establishment are laid, before the tree even arrives on site. The landscape objectives are defined, the site's assessed, constraints identified, the right tree is selected, roles are clearly defined, and the project is designed to give the tree the greatest opportunity to succeed. Planting is an important milestone, but it's only one day in the establishment journey. The foundation phase. This is the most critical period. The focus is on health, supporting root establishment, maintaining soil moisture, reducing transplant stress, and giving the tree every opportunity to become healthy and resilient. The development phase is where we stop asking, will it survive, and start asking, how do we help this tree become the best asset it can be? The focus shifts towards light touch guidance through formative pruning, gradually removing the supports where appropriate, and helping the tree develop the structure and resilience it will need throughout the rest of its life. And eventually the tree reaches graduation. This is not because it reaches a certain age, not because the maintenance contract ended, but because it has demonstrated that it can continue developing independently and is on course to fulfill the landscape function for which it was originally planted. From that point onwards, it becomes another established landscape tree maintained through routine asset management. So as I say, I've started calling this the tree establishment life cycle. Each phase has different objectives, different risks, different management requirements, but they're all connected by one simple principle, that's continuity of care. Before I go on to introduce my protocol, I'd just like to spend a little more time on what I see are the two key post-planting phases of establishment. Although I'd argue that successful establishment actually begins before planting, with the decisions made during the concept stage, today's session is what happens after the tree goes into the ground. So, first of those is the foundation phase. For me, this is the most critical period in the tree's establishment journey. The focus isn't on structure, it isn't on aesthetics, it's on physiology. Everything we're trying to do during this phase is about giving the tree every opportunity to recover from transplanting, regenerate its root systems, and adapt successfully to its new environment. Watering, mulching, weed control. These aren't simply maintenance activities, they're all contributing towards one objective, and that's creating a healthy, resilient tree with the physiological foundations it needs to thrive for the rest of its life. The duration of this phase isn't fixed. A young tree planted in an open ground may progress towards independence relatively quickly, whereas a semi-mature tree planted into a heavily engineered streetscape may require considerably more time and intervention. The destination is exactly the same. The journey simply depends on the details, such as species, stock type, and the landscape context. Once we're confident the tree is healthy and resilient, our priorities begin to change. We move into what I call the development phase. If the foundation phase is about creating a healthy tree, the development phase is about creating a successful landscape tree. We're no longer asking, will it survive? Instead, we're asking, how do we help this tree fulfill the purpose for which it was planted? The focus shifts from physiology to structure, through formative pruning, removing supports at the appropriate time, and guiding the tree's long-term development. Just like the foundation phase, the level of intervention depends entirely on the landscape context. An open-growing park tree may need very little management. A highway tree may require several years of formative pruning to develop the structure and clearances that it's expected of. Ultimately, the development phase prepares the tree for graduation, where it is capable of continuing its development independently while remaining on course to fulfill the purpose for which it was planted. So as I mentioned earlier, I've spent many years looking at tree establishment from different perspectives: specifier, contractor, consultant, and occasionally an annoyed member of the public. What I've shared today is the thinking that's gradually emerged from those experiences. Over the past year, I've started bringing those ideas together into what I'm calling the Thrive Tree Establishment Protocol. It's very much an evolving framework, and I genuinely welcome your thoughts. You can download the current draft using the QR code, and over the coming months, I hope to be continuing developing this with more illustrations, practical examples, and case studies. Importantly, it isn't intended to replace BS 8545 or any other excellent guidance that's already available. It's the opposite. It builds upon it. The protocol isn't about being prescriptive or teaching people how to plant trees. It's about providing a common framework centered around the only constant in every project, the tree. A shared life cycle, a common language, clearly defined phases, outcome-based milestones, and ultimately, it's about maintaining continuity of care from the very first concept through to the point where the tree successfully graduates into the landscape. So if there's one thing I'd like people to take away today, it's these 5 principles. We've got continuity of care, reminds us that the tree shouldn't experience a series of disconnected handovers. It should enjoy one continuous establishment journey. Outcome-based management challenges us to measure how the tree is actually performing, not simply whether we're completing a list of activities. Collaboration recognises that successful establishment depends on everyone involved, from planners and designers through to contractors, asset owners and volunteers, all working towards the same objective. Evidence-based decisions ensure that management is driven by observation and the needs of the tree rather than routine or assumption. And finally, continuous improvement reminds us that every tree we establish is an opportunity to learn something that improves the next project. None of these principles are particularly revolutionary on their own, but together they provide a framework that keeps everyone focused on exactly the same objective, not simply planting trees, but successfully establishing healthy, resilient trees that
Rob, have you accidentally muted yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Perhaps it's time we redefined what successful establishment actually looks like. Not at the end of a maintenance contract, not as an arbitrary number of years. Survival is not enough. Successful establishment is achieved when a tree is capable of continuing its development independently whilst remaining on course to fulfill the purpose for which it was planted. The profession has no shortage of guidance on how to plant trees, but perhaps next we need a common understanding of what successful establishment actually looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was brilliant. Gosh, that goes a long way towards the communication challenge that I spoke about at the start. It really does, and it's received a lot of popular comments in the chat that I can see. So thank you very much for that. And you can stretch that analogy in lots of ways, can't you? Tree nurseries in a very important phase as well. So thank you so much. That's brilliant. Sue, I'm so glad you're monitoring the chat for me. Is there anything that you wanted to
There's so much going on. So there's lots of things which I think people can actually help and answer. There's a sort of whole question between urban environment, hard engineered environments and living soft landscapes, and the impact that makes. But I don't think there's anything so urgent as a question specifically for Rob. But Rob, you'll see where people have asked you questions, like they couldn't make your QR code work, so can you give them the link and so on. So I think we'd probably press on as the result of that.
Great. Okay. So thank you again, Rob. And next up is Ollie Back, who is the Schools and Operations Manager at Street Trees for Living, who's going to talk about how to measure your baseline and short-term change.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, that was a great presentation, Bob. Some of my colleagues talk about tree teenagers, where they're at that sort of point where they're kind of like sort of on their own, but sometimes teenagers mess up. So you need to kind of give them a little bit of a hand. So I really like that analogy. And we've been using that a little bit more. I have to confess, when I talk about establishment phase, I'm going to be talking about the 3-year phase, unfortunately, in this presentation. But yeah, so my name is Ollie. I work for Street Trees for Living. And I'm talking about how to measure your baseline and short-term change. So obviously a massive caveat to that is actually, this is a lot about how we do it, and sort of some of the beliefs that we believe in terms of people-powered ways of doing things. Deanne mentioned a little bit about that with citizen scientists earlier. So I'll do a very quick 2-minute intro to us, just in case no one knows who we are. Then tree monitoring, I'll sort of try and jump into that, why we monitor our trees, how we do it, and some of the stuff that we want to do next. That might be the stuff which has broader appeal. So it's a bit of a call out in terms of being able to sort of work with others, and I'll try and summarize a few things at the end. So yeah, we're a people-powered charity transforming Lewisham streets and communities through tree planting and tree care, really. So we're in South London. We're quite a localized charity, so our home is very much in the Borough of London, London Borough of Lewisham. That's kind of our home. We've done some work in neighbouring areas, but yeah, that local energy that we have brings a lot of benefits, and that'll thread through some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. So yeah, we do street tree planting, so we're talking about standard trees as well. So that we don't do whips or anything like that. They're more appropriate. So broadly speaking, here's some examples of our work. We've got 3 programs. We've got a sponsorship program where people can sponsor trees, and then they agree to look after them. Tends to be residential, but doesn't have to be, can be all sorts of places. We have a school program, planting trees in and around schools. And then the image in the top right is kind of a bit of an example of something we're expanding, which is our community program, which is much more around targeting areas, potentially of low canopy cover, high deprivation, or potentially like busy high streets and things like that. Those are the trees, but obviously we are people powered. So actually it's the people that make this all happen. So we've got a huge bunch of volunteers, partners, people who work with us who basically do a lot of the work that makes tree planting and tree care happen. So it's really down to sort of passionate volunteers, community advocates, right down to the fact that, we've got a deep network in Lewisham where we'll have area reps who sort of, cover an area, and they'll sort to street reps who are literally sort of representing their street and whether they can have more trees in their street. So it really is the people that sort of make this work. So yeah, there's our 3 programs, and we talk about our community forest. So that's a quick intro to us. So monitoring trees. So why we monitor our trees, and probably this is hopefully fairly universal. So predominantly it's to deliver tree care. So whether that's fixing wobbly posts, fixing branches hit by vans, we're checking trees to sort of see whether there's anything active we can do to make sure that that tree can sort of thrive. Here's some examples of our volunteers going out and removing root suckers and things like that. We are working on highways, so there'll be a lot more formative pruning and things like that that need to be happening as well. To ensure trees are getting enough water, so every street tree we plant has a tree guardian, and so they commit to watering for the sort of 3-year establishment phase. But obviously we need to keep tabs on that. We've had multiple heat waves. Every site is different. We're working in harsh urban environments, so sometimes you're watering tree, but it's not getting enough. In some instances, you have really drought resilient species, which are getting too much. So monitoring how much water they're getting, and then potentially coming up with solutions of how to increase or potentially decrease in very rare situations. To learn about our trees, so which species do best, we've got a fairly good database of sort of what's done well and what hasn't. Some of that's on a really local level, so that might just be what works in the soil that we have in Lewisham. It could be something that's a bit broader in terms of these species aren't working in terms of climate change. Yeah, and we get to understand what's making a tree thrive and which types of trees thrive. Track recurring issues. So woolly aphids, we've had a bit of an outbreak of that in certain areas. So by doing our monitoring, we're sort of working out what's actually occurring and potentially whether we can do anything about it if that's at a large scale. And sometimes funding reports. So I think Kate mentioned there's not loads of funding for tree establishment. There has been, and sometimes to report on that. So yeah, when we sort of finish our kind of year of monitoring, so I'll tell you how we do it and how we collect all this information. We end up with something like this. So we do sort of categorize. So my colleague Eva works through reports that we've got in, and we last year did almost 1,200 street trees that were checked. And most like to see that most of them are healthy and safe. We've also then got, obviously, unfortunately, some dead trees, not too many, relatively speaking. And then we've got trees that are struggling that we need to keep an eye on, but there's nothing specific we can do. So that could be the tree isn't looking great, and that could be transplant shock or something like that. And then we've got other categories where it's like, we need to do some tree care about it. So either the tree is really struggling and we need to get to it urgently, or whether it is something like a wobbly post where it's not urgent, but ultimately that will potentially cause an issue, rubbing against bark and things like that. So how we monitor our trees. So there's 2 forms that we do it in terms of we have an annual tree health check for all the trees that have been planted in the last 3 years. And then we also have regular reporting. So the regular reporting is people can essentially report an issue with any tree. We'll get that information, and if it's something that we need to jump to, we'll do it. So our tree care team go out every week, and they prioritize areas of the borough which maybe have a lot of issues or there's a lot of work to be done. Equally, some people go out on their own and sort of fix and address issues. And then every time we do tree care, we're reporting it. So that might be that actually someone spotted something and they've just done it. So we've got a good track of what's been happening and what the events that happen to each tree and activities. Our tree health check, so this is the real bulk of our monitoring work. So every year we send out our form to our tree guardians. So we've got the benefit of the fact that every tree does have someone or a group associated with it. So we'll send them the form. Hopefully they'll return it and tell us how the tree's doing. Sometimes it's great, fine. Sometimes it's like there's a few issues. We also train citizen scientists. We do training sessions where people can go out and do big chunks of trees that potentially still haven't been quite surveyed. And we do run events. So we've worked with sort of Good Gym, for example, where they might do like a 5K run, and on the route they'll do some surveying of some trees and checking of things. We do other things where we'll meet at a pub and then we'll do like a loop round and things like that. So this is the kind of scale of the trees that we're looking at. So this is that sort of benefit of being local. So Lewisham's still quite big, so it's quite a big ground to cover. We basically generate a map and we sort of tick them all off. This is all the trees we've planted, so it's kind of roughly about half of these that we need to survey this year in 2026. But yeah, having that network of people and having been established in Lewisham and it being really our home, sort of staff and volunteers all from here, really makes a benefit of being able to sort of reach different parts of the borough. And yeah, it's really down to activating the passion and energy of people. That is really the way that we do it. So engagement is the #1 priority. So Rob talked about sort of seeing that continuous moment where you've got the planning phase. We've really found that basically if you're not engaging people properly before the tree's planted, you're not necessarily setting yourself up for a good establishment care phase, and potentially you might fall into problems. Our best work is when we've done more engagement early, and we continue to do a lot of engagement over the sort of years that we're there. Again, because we're local, we're always present. So if it's a tree that's planted 12 years ago, we're still happy to support. Our biggest failures are where we haven't done that. We've sort of gone in fairly light touch, planted some trees, and then the care does noticeably suffer. So yeah, here's an example of one of the forms we send. I won't go into the detail of all the questions we ask. We basically ask people to look at sort of leaves, branches, see what's going on, sort of tree stakes and things like that. We do try and get trunk circumference as well so that we can track growth rates. That data is a little bit more patchy, but hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll have a little bit of an interesting information to share on that. So what we want to do next, so we're working with an eco-tech company called Green Talk, who are sort of mapping specialists, and they create a sort of like a kind of user experience web platform that can potentially bring together a lot of the work that we've been doing. So all that monitoring information is all entirely internal, but what we can do and what we're hoping to do with Green Talk is actually create public platforms. So you can actually see the history of what has happened to that tree. You can see the sort of surveys that have happened, the issues that have been reported, and hear about the stories that people have got to tell about the trees. I've mentioned it many times, really the way for us to get good monitoring information and to get sort of large bits of data, it's to activate lots of people and get very excited about working with trees, checking trees. So if we can create a platform, a digital platform where you can scan the QR code on the tree, or even just sort of geolocate yourself on the map, you can read about it, you can hear about the stories, and that gets people excited, and that gets people it brings meaning to why you're doing this. You're trying to you're part of a bigger movement, and you're changing ultimately your neighborhood, and that sort of local interaction again is really powerful for that. So this is a sort of example of what we want to sort of highlight, is that sort of like everyone is doing this for a different reason. There are different motivations for why they have worked with us, whether that's they've wanted to sponsor a tree, plant a tree, look after trees, water trees. Everyone's got sort of different interests. One of the big ones that I'd like to point out is sort of making my neighborhood more livable. I mean, this is so relevant when you're sort of looking at sort of heat waves and the lack of shade and things like that. Trees make places more livable, and so that's really important. So what we want to do is much more combine tree establishment information along with the sort of social impact and how those things are connected, how actually having a healthy community and healthy trees are kind of basically the same thing, and that's how they come about. Also we want to tell the stories of what people's experience has been of looking after trees and actually the way they're looking at things differently. So like the top right here is really nice, where it's made me more aware about the streetscape and what's possible. That sort of idea of, yeah, looking at things a little bit differently. And ultimately, sort of a lot of our monitoring work is actually just bringing people closer to trees, getting you to notice them, it's getting you to sort of understand them. And that kind of tree literacy is really important to share as wide as possible, really. So I think that's everything from me. I don't know if I was a bit too fast, Kate, but I've got time for questions if we want to jump in.
That's great. Thanks, Ollie. Okay, really good. It's a great scheme. There's some very strong synergies between that and our national Trees for Streets scheme, and I know we've had chats about that before, but it's really good to see the community engagement piece, which is very close to my heart, and what we do at Trees for Cities as well. So really good to see that, and some lovely social impact data there that you shared. So thank you for that. Sue, anything you want to bring out?
Ollie's got some questions here. Just a very basic one. Paula asked if you could just share your forms, because they obviously look very useful.
Oh, yep. Yeah, sure.
That was just a quick one. Naomi asked if when you do the health check, if anything untoward is found, does the citizen scientist or the tree carer or whatever actually suggest a specialist is called in to look at the problem? An arboricultural specialist, I assume. Or...
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think everything that comes through is reported sort of into kind of our team. And so we do have a tree specialist in the team who, if it's something that is quite a complicated fix or something like that, yes. If it's significantly problematic, we work really closely with Lewisham Council, so it ultimately would have to go to them. But certainly for the age of the trees that we're working with, it's kind of below that threshold of the priorities of dead, dying, and dangerous, which councils can't necessarily do. So yeah, we do have a sort of process of who that needs to go to.
Yeah. And the other question that came up is, and it's quite interesting because you're planting a lot of street trees. So two things. Asha asked if you had a good relationship with the council, and I presume also a good relationship with the council highways department.
Yeah. So yeah, we have to do a sort of massive shout out to Lewisham Council. They're like really great to work with. So we've got quite a close partnership. We've sort of that's developed over time, and they've got a lot of trust in us. We've got a lot of trust in them. So yes, that is a real key part of how we exist, really. And I think internally, highways are equally sort of connected, and we've had conversations directly with that department. I know that's quite difficult in other areas where things are a little bit more siloed, but
yeah, you've made it back.
For sure.
And then the other question, because several people on the call have special areas of interest, and one of them inevitably is subsidence, particularly with the sort of increased substance we're seeing this year. So Dialgo asks whether you kind of make any relationship between species selection and potential for subsidence, given that you're probably on clay soils.
Yeah, yes, we are. So broadly speaking, we've got sort of requirements and sort of distances that we'll work with Lewisham Council on, because subsidence claims are often going to them, so they're taking a lot of the liability long term of these trees. So we're working within their remit of what is sort of acceptable parameters, and yeah, we'll choose if it's a question, or if it's an area that we're sort of there's a little bit more worry and there's been more subsidence claims, for example, we'll be a lot more picky about the species that we'll choose.
Finally, on species, you said that you were looking at species that seem to thrive well now, but Kieran's asked, do you also consider what's going to thrive with this changing climate? Because, these heat waves we're seeing now, for example, are having quite a big impact on certain species, which probably aren't going to make it going into the future.
Yeah, so hopefully longer term we can feed into that. So we definitely, in our species selection lists, we work within sort of like, I think, is it Q report that was coming out sort of in terms of the new sort of recommended species and what we'll probably do well and not. So yeah, we adjust the species that we're going to plant based on that. But it's interesting to also then sort of be like, oh, and this is the reality of what's happening on the ground, because we've got so much data and information. The amount of imagery we've got on specific trees is like quite big, and so actually being able to go, oh, here's what we found on this, and maybe it matches those predictions, and say, yeah, actually we found 10 years time these trees are not doing that well.
And everybody liked what you were doing and probably wishes they could do the same.
Thank you very much.
That's all I found, Kate.
Great. Okay. Thanks again, Ollie. Right, and so we're coming to our final speaker. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Simon Needle. Simon, I've not seen you for a while. It's good to see you. Who is the Green Infrastructure Strategy and Delivery Lead at Birmingham City Council. So where Ollie was talking more about the monitoring the establishment for the first 10 years of the tree's life, Simon's going to talk more about measuring longer term change. Simon, over to you.
So hopefully you can hear me, and when I go to share, it will not crash because Zoom crashed on me earlier. So I'm going to come back in.
Good luck.
Oh, the sharing is not turned on. Let's send a request and see whether we can share it.
Let's do that. Yeah. Meanwhile, we're enjoying your background.
I'll take it. It was on when I first joined the sharing, but not now for some reason. So
that's okay. We'll just chat.
Yeah. So while we're seeing if that'll. Oh.
Have you got it now?
Yeah, it looks like it's gonna come up now. Give me.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
No, it's okay. I think it might be when I rejoined. It's just not registered. So hopefully you can see my screen now with my nice helm on it. Is that up for you?
Yep, it's there.
It's
okay, right.
For me, at least.
You, thank you. At least it's up now. So right. Yeah. So I'll I was asked to do a little bit about our urban forest and sort of think about measuring and monitoring longer term change. And I think obviously, this is something that we need to do as part of our implementation of our urban forest master plan that we co-wrote between Birmingham Tree People, ourselves, Tree Economics, and Cecil's company, and then was adopted in 2021 or 22, I think it was. But obviously, in terms of tree time, we're still very much at the start of looking at that longer term change. So what I'm going to cover really is a little bit about where we're going, where we're heading. It's not necessarily a how-to or a finished article by any stretch. I think our thoughts may change over time. So let's see if I can change my slides as well. It doesn't want me to move my slides on at the moment. She's just typical.
Dee, are you around with a good idea on this?
Hang on.
Do you want to try sharing again and see if it
was working lovely earlier today, and then now it's just Oh.
Try now.
Right, I've now got a little scrolling circle of doom. It's always the way when you're going to do things live, though, isn't it? It's like everything works fine in practice until you actually get there. So let's give it another go.
Well, don't worry, because we've got a little bit of time on hand.
Moving now. So okay, hopefully that'll go. So I don't think we need to spend any time really on understanding the benefits of trees. Everybody knows those. I just love. It's now going to skip on far too much now. I love that drawing. Apologies if this is jumping about all over the place. It's now showing my.
It hasn't actually moved off the front page.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sue or Dee, do you have a copy of Simon's slides? It might be worth trying to see if you could share.
Is Simon frozen?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't received them prior to the meeting, but we could ask Simon to email them through to me as PDF, and then I could share them. And in the meantime, take some questions maybe.
Right. How are you going, Simon? You're muted now.
Yeah, I'm back in the room. Just give me a few minutes because everything crashed, including my PowerPoint. So I'll reopen that. But if you've got any questions you want to pick up, Dee, in the meantime, just do that, and hopefully we'll get back to the point where I can share.
Right. So one of the questions that came up from Asher was this whole problem of fragmentation of responsibility. And I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts about how to cope with fragmented responsibilities. Rob.
Yep. It's sort of central to the problem that the thesis I'm going on. So what I can see is that obviously we need to have collection of data. Deanne picked up collecting data consistently and ownership of the project. So we need like an asset manager or the ultimate tree owner at the end. And the solution that I can see and the gap in the market, and I'm talking to people about this, is to have a software that actually, just like we have an asset management system for managing established trees, they're not actually particularly useful at managing young trees and going through this establishment phase because it's a very intense period of its life. Don't want to put a year number on it, but 5 to 10 years of its time between concept and graduating into the landscape. And I feel like there's a need there for a collaborative software that everyone in the supply chain can access and feed in and out of. And I think that's, from me, that's where I think there's a gap, and I think that's where things are falling through. It also opens up an interesting concept that I've got is at the end of this, when the tree graduates, why not give it a birth certificate with everything that's gone on prior to this point that can then be loaded into the asset management. So in 100 years' time, you can see what's been going on, and that ability to analyze the data, I think, would be really useful across the industry, nurseries, practitioners, planners. So
it's a bit like passports for buildings, everything that's happened.
Yeah.
So there's, in a way, it reduces excuses, doesn't it, if things go wrong?
Yeah.
Another question that came up was from Janine Brightman. How do councils determine canopy cover? That's a question that really interests me because I'm always feeling that there isn't, people talk about 30% canopy cover. I mean, these are random figures. What do they mean depending on place, and how do you decide how much canopy cover a place needs? If anybody speaking or on the call has any thoughts on that, and I know Kieran Doik's here, which can probably help as well if he puts his camera on. Any solutions to that question? Kieran, good.
It takes ages to come off camera, doesn't it? Reminds me of the series we did on this, didn't we? Little mini conference on canopy cover measurement. I mean, it's still really interesting. There are so many different approaches being taken up. But I think we are beginning, and certainly in some quarters, to see us settling down on that. I mean, there is the DEFRA Forest Research Trees Outside of Woodland map, for example, that is about to launch its second iteration. If you put that alongside the statistics for woodland, you've got the two sides of the coin together that make up a whole. So I think if that does settle into a reproducible cycle and methodology, that'd be a great step forward. Of course, we've still got the proprietary systems that we can, data sets that we can buy, which doesn't always support everybody because of the price tag. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but we're still waiting really to see, how often these updates might come forward.
Naomi's got her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Sue. So my question is, what is canopy and how do you assess it? And what we often miss is starting with what already exists in the ground and focusing our attention on growing that into maturity and getting canopy that way rather than the planting treadmill, which often is geared to numbers and not quality or growing. And so it really needs to come back to the beginning of the process and address the challenges that are facing what's already in the ground, solving those challenges so that what's in the ground does become the asset it could be. And then going on from there with what we have learned from what we have addressed. Thanks.
Simon, how are you going?
I think I'm okay. We can give it another go. I don't know what's happening with Zoom at our end, but yeah, well, or even if it's my laptop, but we can give it another go.
Okay. Kate and I'll look through all these questions meanwhile.
Okay, let me give it another go. So we'll try again, and I should put it into presenter mode, hopefully. Let's hope this doesn't do the same thing again. Okay, has that come up on your screen now?
Yeah, we can see the first slide, and we can see the whole set of slides as well. So you're not in presentation mode, but it might work better like that.
Okay, well, it's gone to presentation mode.
Oh, yeah, it's come through now. Yeah, okay. Let's try moving on one. See if
it'll let me move through the slides now. So yeah. Yeah, okay. So yeah, so I was saying earlier about the fact that we had our urban forest master plan, which we co-created and was adopted, and obviously part of that we need to look at whether we're being successful in delivering on that urban forest master plan. So part of that monitoring and longer term monitoring is what we need to be heading towards, so we can see whether we're successful in going to hit those targets that we'd set for our sort of 2051 vision. I don't need to dwell too long on this slide. Obviously, we all know about the benefits of trees. I really like the little graphic because obviously it sets out really well why we need trees in those urban environments. Birmingham, like many other cities, has lots of challenges. Big population, significant numbers of our wards in the top 10 of percentile of indices of multiple deprivation, lots of high levels of years life lost. We've got issues with air pollution, urban heat island, and pluvial flooding, plus the need for additional houses as well. So lots of pressures on both, I suppose, organisations to help combat things like these years life lost and air pollution, looking at the impact on land for where we need homes, and all that obviously is having that interrelationship with trees and green infrastructure as well. We originally started off with creating an environmental justice mapping as part of our City of Nature plan, but we involved that a little bit further then to look at a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. And this is a map of the city showing this is actually lower super output areas, so 639 of those across the city, highlighting where there is high or very high climate risk for citizens and where that risk is lowering, so going out into those sort of paler yellow areas. And it's very clear that there's a big band across the centre of the city there where there's very high risks. This mapping here involves numbers of data sets looking at things like nitrogen dioxide, fine particulate matter, those flood risks, surface temperature, deficit of open green space, and deficit in tree canopy cover, as well as the other aspects that we've spoken about. If we look at canopy cover, now this is a good question about a little bit about answering how we measure canopy cover. We were looking at how we were going to set our understanding or set our start line baseline of canopy cover and how we were going to monitor against that. When we were looking at canopy cover at the start of this, we were looking at a number of different methods and sampling uh, methodologies and results from those, and was realizing that actually there was some variance between the various methods because they were either maybe over quantifying or under quantifying, or they were being done in a particular way that might have missed out some elements of canopy cover overall. But we already had some data from on the national tree map from Blue Sky, and so we decided that actually we were going to utilize that going forward. So we've got a standard approach each time we were looking at that. That does mean we've now got a commitment to look at using that system for a while. But I suppose, with the advent of more, I suppose, AI options, use of satellites, we may change in time depending on, I suppose, the availability of those and cost. But we can see here from the city map again, that's the same layout with those lower super output areas. The areas that are dark green are those areas with the higher canopy cover, going down to those lighter, paler colours across that broad centre where we've got lowest levels of canopy cover. So on average across the city, if we take out the areas such as football stadiums, lakes, reservoirs and stuff, we're probably around the 20% canopy cover range. But the variance between areas in the city can be as much as 50% canopy cover in some areas down to probably sort of 5 or 6% in other parts of the city, particularly that city centre area. We also had an iTree eco study undertaken in 2023. Now, this was done using mostly volunteers across the city. So Birmingham Tree people were coordinating a lot of our volunteering activity for that. That undertook 200 plots across the city. Because although we had a fair amount of data in terms of canopy cover, and we also had data or GIS-based data and survey data from our highways trees and parks trees, we didn't have that sort of more broader picture of what else there was out there thinking about both public and private estate. So there was, I think, 200 sample plots across the city. Were done over the course of probably about, I think it was 3 weeks, maybe 4 tops, with the volunteer groups going out and doing all those measurements. And then Treeconomics did a lot of the, I don't know, it's Barton High, I think it was, did some of the crunching along with Treeconomics. And so we've got this sort of basic structure and composition with the headline figures there. So about 1,129,000 trees, density of 42 trees a hectare. This was showing the tree canopy cover being at 15%, and I think that's where it's interesting to see that difference between what we were getting through from aerial imagery and assessment that way through to this measured on the ground canopy cover. That although that's randomized samples, I think it may still, be a bit hit and miss really in terms of where we're actually getting some of our sites and were they just adjacent to trees, but not actually where those trees are. It's given us some indication of shrub cover and also the most common tree species that were found, which were birch, sycamore, and holly in this respect. Although I know that when we look at our other surveys, we've got quite high levels of things like oak, because we've got 1,398 hectares of woodlands across the city. So oak is a predominant species within those. And we've got things like the replacement cost and the amenity valuation there of 25.3 billion. And the proportion of the trees in good or excellent condition is 72.9%. And interestingly for us as well, it gives us that elements of carbon storage and carbon sequestration. So in terms of why we might be monitoring some of the urban forest, these are some of the elements that are in there. Think about that value to society in terms of how we're helping to adapt and mitigate to climate change, as well as those mental health and well-being benefits that come from being in a green environment. We did some work following on from the Urban Forest Master Plan with Treeconomics, and we looked at an economic valuation for baseline and growth scenarios for the urban forest. Depressingly, despite everything that we are trying to do in terms of managing our existing trees, think about how we are trying to encourage increased planting. The forecast is that the city was still slowly losing tree canopy cover, particularly when a business usual approach will do nothing to stem that decline, and so we'd see a continued reduction in canopy cover by 2051. So on a scale of the city, it might sound a relatively modest change, but that was potentially seeing the loss of maybe 65,000 trees if they were sort of the average size, all the size of the current average across the city, which I think on the iTree Eco Survey was around 34 square meters of canopy per tree. The reduction in treescape on this scale for the city would be a reduction in amenity value of 1.2 billion. And a potential release of 19,000 tons of carbon valued at 19 million pounds. So, it's a reduction of £1 million in annual ecosystem services. So, pretty depressing, really. But the other thing to consider as well is that we're not going to get out of this situation by tree planting alone. And then actually it has to be a combination of how we manage existing tree assets as well as how we replace those trees that need to be removed for whatever reason, whether it be through health reasons, the age of the tree, or whether it's coming out through development interventions. Going back to our use of National Tree Map and the Blue Sky data, it was interesting to consider the fact that we've got a number of data sets now over a number of years. So I think we've got 2013, 2016, 2019, and 2023. So it comes out about every 3 years. And when we compare that against our sort of aerial imagery, so this is Highgate Park in central Birmingham that I'm just using as an example. We can see that the National Tree Map, this is the one for 2019, is a relatively good overlay for the canopy cover there. However, when we start to compare that with other years, so this is the year from 2016, so there's actually slightly more canopy showing there. And if we overlay the two, we can see that there are variances there in the two canopy cover mapping data sets there. I think it was interesting to note that, is this a case of loss of canopy cover, or is this more a case of an accuracy improvement in the aerial imagery that's coming forward? And so is that having an impact on there? I know from talking to Blue Sky, well, to Blue Sky themselves, that they also have improved the resolution of their cameras. They're using obviously LiDAR, but over cities they were also introducing oblique photography, which was picking up some smaller trees and picking up some of the other canopy that wasn't necessarily captured before, but also may help eliminate some of those areas where we've got shadow overlay as well, or we've got shadows which might be being picked up as canopy cover. So I think although we can use this and start to look and overlay these canopies to see if we're getting that change, we can, we can look at these data through GIS and sort of try and measure percentage changes overall. We do have to account for the fact that there may be some element of accuracy improvements in these. And some of the work we did as well with Woodland Trust on their tree equity mapping, we compared the data that we were getting out of National Tree Map with the Google tree imagery, and they weren't too far off actually each other. I think the Google tree imagery, I think, is being updated annually, I think. So there are opportunities for people to get data similar to this to review this. Some of the work we were also doing using this mapping was to try and identify areas where we thought tree canopy was being lost. I suppose having worked in planning and development and worked in parks for a long time, you do get a gut instinct about where you are seeing tree attrition. And so some of our inner city areas are places where we're seeing highest levels of attrition. So maybe a ward such as Allen Rock, for example, which already has a relatively low canopy cover, but we're seeing loss of trees within private residential spaces, the gardens there. So thinking about how we have to work together with our colleagues in planning who manage things like TPO designations, that's going to be a key part about how we sort of maintain or start to maintain or have a little bit more influence over some of these non-public trees. Is it decided not going to move to the next slide now? Oh, there we go. Part of the other work that we were looking at was we looked at our current canopy cover as of 2022, and we also looked at data from our planning and development colleagues and highways colleagues, so looking at trying to forward project transport projects, thinking about potentially expansion of the rail network, thinking about those expansion of urban areas, land that was already identified within local plan for housing and development. So things that were included in the strategic and economic land allocation assessments. And the projections were that actually we were going to be seeing a subtle change in where canopy cover was from today. And I suppose that gives us an opportunity to try and focus on those areas where we think we will see some of that change. So some of that change might have been positive. So looking at our woods and open green spaces, we're looking that we might be seeing a positive change there. But in things like roads or particularly urban areas, seeing a increased or a decrease in canopy cover in those. So an increased rate of attrition in there. So within the road network, as we've got new schemes coming on, we might be losing some mature trees there. Yes, okay, we might be getting some new planting going in, but is that going to be sufficient to stem that tide? And will it actually achieve what we need to do? And particularly in and around that urban area, thinking about how that plays a part within our planning and development or planning permission world, and what sort of conditions, how we're looking at landscape plans, and how we lever additional green infrastructure into those. So this all plays a part, along with that CRVA map we showed earlier, into forming an evidence base for implementation of new planning policies, such as urban greening factor, which I know has been sort of already used in London and a few other places, but is now sort of set into our preferred plan for local development. So hopefully that will give some incentive to lever in additional greening into those spaces. Part of that tree equity, iTree Eco Survey was looking at our tree species diversity and looking at where we rank. So being an urban area, we do have quite a percentage of non-native trees. So we are seeing that we've got more tree species diversity than traditional native woodland. But the West Midlands as a whole is looking at quite a good diversity of tree species, and which one was that there? That was the Black Country had got quite a high diversity of species there. This was all derived from their iTree Eco surveys as well. But I know that across our parks and green space, we do have a higher diversity than is being shown there. But this was, like I say, coming from our iTree Eco survey. So just think about what we need to do in terms of how we diversify those species, how we increase the cover of those, what we need to do to protect existing species, all part of our long-term monitoring and measuring. This was just another indication here about the levels of tree species across the top 10 there. So looking at which were the most common species within there. As a whole, whether we're using this data here or whether we're looking at our actual survey data from our plotted and monitored trees, we're doing pretty well against that Santamore 30-20-10, 10-20-30, whichever way around you want to say it, rule. And so we're not sort of seeing huge areas of trees or huge percentage of trees that are falling into one particular species, genus, or family. There are some which are just tipping over the edge, but not massively so. But having that diversity gives us that little bit of resilience against future pests and diseases as well. Tree condition was also recorded in there. I think we were doing pretty well looking at that. A good percentage of our trees were in good or fair condition overall. Holly was looking a little bit strange in there in terms of the overall condition of that. But all of this data is giving us an indication of what we need to be focusing on, what those impacts are or could be, and where we might need to be seeing some more action around those trees. We've also we're just in the process of moving over to a new asset management system for our tree survey. So again, that'll be providing us some more data around the tree quality in there. Just trying to think where I am on my slate. So thinking about all of that, we were looking at where our risks and opportunities were. We know that some of our greatest canopy cover gains are going to come from the trees that we already have, and so managing those better is going to give us the biggest gains in canopy cover. So can we change the mowing regime around some of the trees? Can we mulch some of the trees? Can we remove some of that compaction and improve those soil and rooting conditions? Can we improve the amount of water availability to those trees? So if we're re-landscaping some of our parks or green space or hard landscaping, can we use that process to divert more water into those rooting zones, which will support those trees in the longer term? But we also need to think about, what are we doing in terms of our planting? And I know others have already mentioned some of this. Thinking about those current and potentially future pests and diseases, what impact is that going to have on our overall canopy cover? At the moment, we've got about 1,240 entries, maybe more now, I suppose, on the UK Plant Risk Register. Within the city, things like that would have the greatest impact across the urban forest would be Asian longhorn beetle, which could affect 57% of our trees. But obviously, we've got things like acute oak decline and oak processionary moth, which could threaten 11% of our total here as well. So, and those have implications for human health as well, was particularly oak processionary moth does. So we've got a lot of work to do around monitoring what is happening to our trees. How are we going to tackle these issues? I was lucky enough to be down at the Urban Forest and Woods Advisory Council, which was held at Kew last week, and Kev there was talking about the tree species selection and the work that he's doing, and just thinking about the projections that, by 2100, probably almost half the UK would perhaps be unsuitable for Quercus robur growth. We might be looking at a climate that's very similar to Kazakhstan and Kurdistan. So very different realm, I think, for thinking about what these trees are going to have to, or different scope of what these trees are going to have to contend with going forward. So that's really going to have to influence how we, I suppose, monitor and manage the trees that we've already got, and then think about those tree planting species going forwards. And you can see from the table here, just some of those pests and pathogens. I mean, yes, okay, some of these are not present in the UK as it stands, but if the risk is that any of these are coming forward, what percentage of our population is at risk from those? Is that going to have a big impact? Can we start to plan for that potentially being here now? There we go. So yeah, I suppose that's where, working with others and looking at the sort of information that comes out through Trees and Design Action Group is really useful for us about thinking about that horizon scanning, thinking about the information on tree species choices, and what we're going to be planting in the future, given the potential climate that we will be facing. And of course, not to tie back into the very first conversation here, the work that Birmingham tree people are doing on their citizen science and their newly planted tree survey protocol. I mean, it was mentioned that it was sort of based on the Bloomington sampling, but I think that's providing quite a good bit of information to us about what tree species are potentially doing well, in what locations, are some species doing well in a particular setting, but not in others. So all of this is, I think, having shared that around is really going to be very useful for us going forward, particularly in how we perhaps plan to get contract growing for trees, so that we know that we've got opportunities to secure the trees that we want to plant going forward, rather than just what the market's got available at the moment. And that's me. I think managed to get through that in the end. Let it crashing. I'll stop sharing now.
Well done, Simon. Thank you. That was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think you've done such a great job of spearheading an amazing flagship case study, really, with the work in Birmingham. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think substantiating Rob's point that we've got the knowledge, we've got all the evidence and the data. There's so much there. We've got so much, all the tools we need. So really, really nicely presented. Thank you. And not only that, but also the partnership work that you've been doing. So I know that's been a huge joint effort, and that's been really good to see. Sue, anything you wanted to, any questions
there was partly it's my question, but anyway, this whole thing of tree equity and where there's sort of obviously need for canopy cover and tree planting, are you finding difficulty in actually getting the space to plant the trees in those sorts of areas, or?
I think yes, I will say it is difficult to get space to plant trees in those areas. I mean, typically we've got areas which are dense Victorian terraced housing, the pressure on the streetscape for parking. We're a very diverse, have a very diverse population, and multi-generational households are quite prevalent in some of those areas, and so therefore you've got multiple generations each with their own car, so that significant pressure there. But Birmingham Tree people have been doing some great work in terms of engaging communities on streets, just the same, in some respects, same as street trees for living. Actually having that engagement early on, trying to get people to think about trees out the front of their house, particularly in some areas where we'd got build outs already that had previously had trees but had been lost. So trying to get the communities engaged in those locations, replanting those. We do need to, I think, focus on how we can encourage more planting on the private land within those gardenscapes as well, where we're seeing the attrition. And then I think tying into things like that urban greening factor, can we use that as a way to lever in additional green infrastructure that perhaps wouldn't have been there in the traditional sort of planning sense? And if they can't get it in on that in the development site because they want to max out on there, can we actually encourage that to put that into the streetscape? So that's one aspect. And then our highways colleagues are, I'm not saying they're necessarily, ahead of the curve on all this because other local authorities have picked this up, but they are implementing the Healthy Streets Index as a way of sort of assessing projects that are coming forward. So again, that, I'm seeing our highways engineers coming forward with plans for putting trees in streets that are funded partly through the clean air zone charges. So we've got a transport and environment fund that they use, and they work with the community to put in local measures, and they seem to be very keen on trees and green infrastructure. So, we're going that way. It's just probably a little bit, hopefully we'll accelerate it there.
Well, we're all watching Birmingham because you lead and we rush on and follow.
It's nice of you to say that, Sue. I think there's loads of people out there who've got some great examples. I mean, it's just that we have had that platform to show the work. And, we go to other places and see fantastic work by others.
Kate, there were various other things, but I'm not sure it's just for Simon. I think any of the other speakers or indeed anybody on the call might have something to say. So if they all put their cameras on, we could. So this is another of my questions.
Fine. Yeah, so if all speakers could put their cameras on. Oh, sure. If all speakers can put their cameras on, and then if anyone else has a question they'd like to ask themselves from the audience, if you could also put your cameras on, and then we can spot who'd like to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just one question from me, of course. I'm always intrigued when we talk about the value of ecosystem services and the loss of that value, because the problem is, how do we turn that into money that actually then helps pay for trees? We've lost the service, but there's no, except perhaps occasionally water companies, there's no sort of funding to actually say, oh gosh, we've lost all this ecosystem service, so we better give you the money to restore it.
I mean, if I could just jump in there, Sue, I think, partly I'm trying to make sure that we avoid that occurring in the first place. So, as part of our tree policy review back in 2018, we adopted CAVAT as one of the methods of assessment within our highway schemes, and basically said, if you want to lose these trees, then you need to put that sum aside as a provisional sum. And when it starts getting up into the hundreds of thousands, they start thinking, we haven't got that within the budget. So they have been much more proactive, I think, in trying to design around those. And they have also, luckily for me, put that money aside into a budget to allow that to be used for replanting. So we end up, we might lose one tree, but actually we've been able to plant, 5, 10, 15, 20 more, with some decent rooting environments as well, which is critical. So it's not perfect, but it's at least managed to sort of focus them on that thought of those longer term impacts.
So I'll stop asking my questions, but I see Susan's got her camera on and Daisy, and then Naomi's got her hand up. So did you have your cameras on to ask a question? So Naomi's got one.
So, Sue, what you've put out there, what I would suggest that's often forgotten about is the avoided costs that tree retention and protection avoid. So if you think about a maturing tree that is healthy and is being sustained, and one of the short-term thinking arguments is, of course, maintenance costs and this and that. But now, if you take that maturing tree and you look at the services that maturing tree delivers, both what you can quantify using iTree and what you can't quantify, such as health and social benefits. And then you compare that with the avoided costs. What does the retention of a tree avoid? So let's look at what it costs to build a water filtration plant. Let's look at the increasing costs of public health. And those costs, and compared to the benefits that the natural asset capital investment that a tree is, and that asset appreciates, which is a rare thing, we need to get the people who are doing the funding and the short-term thinking to think more in terms of outcome-based budgeting. How you quantify the outcomes that a tree delivers compared to what that tree is helping you avoid.
Yep. Absolutely, and I have got some figures on sort of heading in that direction and around that, but I didn't include them in this today. Otherwise, it'd be a 3-hour presentation.
I actually did a paper on that was published by the Arb Association magazine.
But you're absolutely right.
It's often forgotten when municipal tree workers are confronted with these short-term thinking of financial people and decision makers. They often don't have this in their toolbox of what about this and what about that. We have to give them the tools that they can challenge those decisions.
No, absolutely. And our public health colleagues are also very much on the case and quite supportive, and are inputting into quite a whole range of policies, and they're looking, as you say, about the outcomes basis. So
Keen to hear from others. Karina, I'm not sure who came on camera first, that was Karina or Daisy, but Karina, I'll go to you first because you're up top of my screen. I think you're muted. You look like you came off mute, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. So I was saying that, first of all, thank you for putting together a wide range of topics in relation with tree establishment maintenance, and from different perspectives, from the community side, from the council side, from the consultant side. I think that is refreshing to see the different angles. My question or feedback was in terms of the importance that once you have a project that is going to have green infrastructure or trees or urban trees, you had passed through all those filters of getting approval, getting procurement, and having a design. But I do agree in the quick link in between the delivery and then thereafter the maintenance. So the maintenance team will be fantastic, the delivery team will be fantastic, but sometimes it's not having that. The contractor may not have the landscape arm included on the decision-making table, and when you are delivering the urban trees, sometimes there is an issue that the landscaper may not be present or the experts may not be present in the decision-making table. And I'm talking here now when a project is delivered on site, and there are small decisions that can have a big impact, or even sometimes the contractor wouldn't have the skill on the ground. And a key aspect like watering could be the whole circle has been all acknowledged, but a small aspect like watering can be the detrimental effect for the whole project that takes so long to get there. And I just wanted to know what is the feedback in terms of getting a governance that can be strong in paper, but in the delivery field is strong enough to ensure that expertise is in the table and is going to be delivering. So not just from senior management, but I'm talking here like the laborers that they are going to be watering the tree, that they are going to be maintaining, that they are going to be ensuring that, as one of your colleagues said, I think it was Robert, that tree had become now, had graduated, and we can be happy that, you know, the tree is self-sustained. And it's just part of feedback and part of question, I suppose, for the different people that had presented today.
Rob, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's exactly, you've hit the nail on the head. And I think I've experienced the same problem as specifiers, that it's really hard to get that knowledge down to onto the ground, which is really important. But equally, I would say it's just as important to listen to the people on the ground when you're doing your specify. They've got incredible knowledge with actually how a project is implemented. And again, I'm very lucky to have been in projects from every angle. I mean, you know, I've been on the diggers planting trees, planted many thousands, and I've really refined the technique of how I would deliver a planting project compared to where I started. And I'd love specifiers to know that, because the decisions made at the start make a massive difference on the ground. I've got various views on how irrigation methods should be used, and I don't think it's not really the forum to be going down that road. But yeah, having a real collaborative approach, both from every angle. I wouldn't say top to bottom. I would say we're all feeding in with the tree in the middle. We should all be feeding and listening and talking to each other. And I think as a specifier or a project owner, whether that's the asset manager at the end of the day or the landscaper, I think the onus is there because you're at the start to really bring everyone together. And
Can I just say, I agree there. We used to have a mantra about designing with management and maintenance in mind. And with a lot of buildings, the facilities management people are brought in at the design stage, and they'll say to you, it's not going to work. You can't do it that way. We're failing to do that when it comes to our public spaces and our tree planting. Anyway, that's my take.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Daisy and then to Susan, and then I'll probably hand back to you, Sue, to close, if that's okay. But thanks, Daisy, for your patience. Did you want to ask your question?
Hello. Yeah, I just I wasn't expecting it to come on camera today, so sorry, it's not a great hair day for me here. But I did just want to ask everybody what they think about decompacting sites, because we see this so regularly on all of the building sites. And building sites make up a big proportion of how new trees are added to the urban environment in a lot of cities. So yeah, I just wondered it's probably Rob and Simon question maybe, because I don't know, but yeah, anyone can jump in. Ollie, I don't know if you do any of that, but I've seen Rob you out with an air spade before, and I wondered if you could just speak to that and at what age that could be relevant, if it can ever be done on young trees, to kind of avoid the problem at the start rather than needing to do it with a big tree and more resource later on. Is there a mini air spade available? Can we do this? Over to you.
Yeah, so decompacting is a bit of a can of worms. It goes back to all the other things, just trying to avoid the compaction in the first place, and so I mean it's a bit of a cop out. But I know with development sites, public open space areas tend to be the bits that are used by the yards. You know, that's where storage of materials, and that's the bit that gets pulled out at the end and eventually gets landscaped. So they tend to be incredibly compacted. So whether or not we need to improve our standards about, from a planning perspective and actually set standards of what healthy soil is and that sort of thing and be better at that. But enforcement is an issue there. But to get to the practicalities, air spading and geoinjecting is, there's no reason why it couldn't be used, and it is being used a lot privately, where new homes are eventually adopted and they come into and find their gardens flooded in the winter. It's being used a lot, not just from a tree perspective, but just to generally improve the soil. I'm a big advocate for biochar, and it's got amazing properties. I was skeptical to start with, but I've seen some fantastic results.
Yeah, I think I also have a bag of biochar in the boot, and I was wondering, I suppose, whether it was ever infiltrating into these compacted sites itself, or whether it needed mechanical kind of in and that was where that original question sort of arose from, actually, is wondering whether if we were advocating for residents going around and sprinkling some biochar on the pits in their newly planted sites, if we weren't probably infiltrating it, then would it just be useless?
Pretty much needs to be incorporated. And where you have mechanical compaction, it has to be, whether that's human mechanically decompacting or whether that's plants and worms and things like that, it actually has to have an active decompacting agent. It's very expensive to get humans because of the labor costs. So yeah, natural for large areas, planting deep-rooted systems and having weeds and long grass and things like that are very effective for large areas.
Thank you. Thanks for your question, Daisy. And Susan, thank you. You've been waiting patiently. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I apologise for my backdrop of my walk-in wardrobe. We don't use Zoom at work. We use Teams. We don't approve of Zoom in the organisation that I work in. So I'm a senior landscape officer at Natural England. And I've really enjoyed the talks today. Going back to Naomi's point, I completely agree with Naomi's points that she's made about cost and thinking about the wider picture. But when I saw those figures, I just thought of councillors in council chambers spluttering over cups of tea when they start looking at figures like that. And I know things have moved on for a long, long time. I worked for a big council in Northern England for 9 years, and that council used to spend all its time looking over the fence at what another council was getting up to with the tram infrastructure, tram lines. So I know what it's like when you get into those environments and you're looking at the bottom line around figures and costs of everything. My last foray into working in another Northern Council in England, and I take my hat off to Simon for all the hard work that he's doing down in Birmingham. But the Parks Department's budgets were slashed to smithereens, and the team hadn't had any training for years when I took over. So I spent a year getting the training and development up for those staff, on so many fronts, because parks in councils is not a statutory service, whereas waste and schools and housing is statutory. So you kind of put at the bottom of the pile. So I take my hat off to Simon and all the work that he's doing in Birmingham.
Thanks, Susan. And I'm going to try and sort of bring in some of the chat that's happening around skills shortages in the sector as well, because I know there's a bit of chat happening about that, which Simon, have you got anything, or any of the speakers, do you have anything to comment on that?
The only thing I was just going to say, I was just going back to that point you were making then, saying I think public health have been a really big ally for us, particularly in the last couple of years. in terms of looking to support parks and green space and really push that up the agenda. So much so that they want to, invest heavily in sort of our park service and providing staff for engagement and management. But but we're particularly about training and development now. I think it's something that we've definitely seen the shortage of. I mean, I think we used to have our horticultural training centre, which closed probably close on 30 years ago, but we are looking to see whether we can reinvigorate some element of land-based training, because we know that, trying to do some recruitment at the moment. There's some good candidates out there, but there's a lot that you could bring in if we had an appropriate training scheme in-house, or we're able to do apprenticeships more. So definitely looking to do more of growing our own talent, I think, to start off with, and just looking straight out to the market.
Got one other little point as well. I know a lot of local authority colleagues are a bit scared about the local authority devolution and a lot of changes going on there. Maybe a bit naive, but potentially where we are as a lot of district councils and bringing them under a unitary authority where you do have statutory powers, such like health and education, brought into one place, and highways, there's a potential for this more collaborative approach, which I think Simon probably benefits from, being in Birmingham. Having everyone all under one roof is quite helpful from a funding perspective, but I may be naive.
Yeah.
Sorry, could I jump in here, please? I haven't been able to put my hand up, but as an ex-educator and been involved in the educational system for a while, all sectors of this industry are missing the one thing they can do, and that is to get into schools at GCSE level, because there is no, I've been to so many careers guidance things for my kids as they were growing up. I asked each time, I don't see any land-based people representing here, either agriculture, horticulture, landscape, arboriculture, forestry. Oh no, we only deal with chartered professions. Until I pointed out that the ICF actually is a chartered profession, okay? And the problem is between GCSE and A-level, between sort of 16 and 18, these kids disappear into the system. Now, you talk to them, as I have done, and said, how would you like to go and be able to climb trees and use chainsaws and plant trees and look after the environment? They love it. They've got more energy to burn than you believe, but there is no pathway open to them. It's not presented by the careers people. We need to get to whatever the convention is for careers teachers and put our industry in there and say, these are good industries. We should get people in there. I rest my case. Sorry, rant.
Completely,
absolutely.
Thank you. And yeah, Max made the point. It's the national curriculum that stops this. No space in the agenda for anything else. And yeah, having spoken to teachers, I think that's absolutely true. It's sad but true. Okay, I can't see anyone else with cameras on. Thank you so much to all our speakers. I think it's been an incredibly rich and informative session. We've heard from 4 fantastic experts and covered a huge amount of ground. So thank you to all our speakers, and thanks to TDAG as well for putting this on. I'll hand back to Sue now.
Okay, well, thank you, Kate, for chairing. Thank you, everybody, and for all the questions. I'm going to have fun with the chat, but I'll do my best to make sense out of it. So we're going to take a break in August. I'm sure everybody else is hoping to. Unless you plan to go to Bartram Trees, who are running 2 in-person sessions on the 5th and the 12th, linked to trees and climate change, which was actually one of the things I didn't raise, which is, should all cities have climate risk and vulnerability assessments? Might that actually spur action? Our next online seminar will be on the 23rd of September, and it's on trees and the law in plain English, because when we ran this in 2024, it was one of the most watched recordings. So we're going to have another dive into tree law. And we're discussing what to discuss in October. So if anybody's got any ideas, please email us. And then in November, we'll have our second Trees and Design Action Group, the Mersey Forest research plan for people at not young people, but in their early stages of their research careers. And we'll be putting up the application details for that shortly. And that's pretty well it. So, you know, I want to say have a good summer, except it's so damned hot. I'm not sure how good it's going to be, but it's actually a bit of a sort of wake-up call, I hope, to everybody who hasn't yet woken up to the fact that we know we need more trees and we need to look after what we've got. So thank you all, and tea time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kate. Gosh, poor Simon.